Welcome back, I am John P. Today we're going to be doing the TLDR, Too Long Didn't Read, watch news for March 22nd, 2023. This is a new format. It seems like there's people out there that have been enjoying this. We're going to give it another shot and really condense the news in the watch industry to short snippets, and then the links will be down below where you can feel free to follow those stories and check it out for yourself should you be interested for the rest of the details in those stories, including watch releases, things going on in the industry, and so much more. So check the comments below. Also today, guys, on the wrist today, I have once again the Patek Philippe 5110J yellow gold world time. I like this 37mm version. This is a somewhat newer addition to my collection, and I just have so much fun with this watch. So let's get right into it. The first piece of news here, actually it's kind of in case you missed it, this is going to be a new watch that was subtly released. It's going to be the new Blancpain Air Command chronographs, flyback chronographs that give a nod to not only the aesthetics, but kind of the lifestyle of 1950s aviation, early days of aviation. And it's kind of interesting because it's something you'll see that's really taken over the watch industry recently. This brand, Longines, so many others, those kind of more classic pilots chronographs. And the specific example that we have here, I'm so excited about it because not only does it have flyback complication, which is awesome. Essentially, a flyback complication is instead of having to stop and reset the chronograph functionality by using the separate pushers for that, you can actually just pop it back to the original starting point. That can be useful for things like timing laps, for example. I think that's very helpful for that, but it's extra mechanics, extra gearing, and that's very cool to see in luxury watches. But why I like this watch so much is there's a 36.2mm version of this watch, and that's more in line and classic with vintage watches, and it's more wearable for me, especially with 6.5-inch wrist. So I really like this watch, and this is going to be clocking in at 18,000, just north of 18,000 US dollars for the titanium version. And of course, there is a gold version that's going to be selling for substantially more. Make sure to check it out. Link in the description below. Now, rolling on to the next piece here, in a very similar kind of release, another flyback chronograph, but this is going to be much more palatable in terms of the pricing. This is going to be from none other than Longines, which has been focusing so much on their heritage collections the last 6 years, and rightfully so, because they have a lot of heritage that many people don't realize, because Longines has positioned themselves as one of the more affordable brands in the Swatch group. But this certainly is a bit of an exception to the brand in terms of the complications, because it does feature that flyback complication, but this only is going to be about $4,450 US dollars, and I think for 41mm, much larger than the previous watch we just talked about, for this type of size, to have a flyback chronograph, that is just not something that you see every day, to see this complication in a much more approachable price point like this. So I think Longines is really doing a phenomenal job. Make sure to check out the link if this is a watch that you're interested in. Now, another brand that has been focusing so much on their heritage collections, or their heritage-inspired collections, is going to be from Breitling, and Breitling is doubling down on the classic car collection. Now, a couple of years ago, they had a classic car collection for the top time that did feature an ETA-based movement for about $5,000, and it started with the Chevy Corvette, the Shelby Cobra, and the Ford Mustang. But now they have two changes. The first is these watches are going to be featuring their B01 chronograph movement, which has just received so many accolades and praise for the functionality, as well as the reliability and serviceability, which is something that does matter to collectors today, especially when the price points start creeping up. Serviceability is big. So the B01 has really carved out a piece of the watch industry for them. Now, interestingly enough, this particular watch is the new Ford Thunderbird, which I think looks pretty charming, but keep in mind this new version of the watch is no longer limited. They're going to be produced in the same quantities as their normal standard fare watches, and the retail price does go up to about 8,000 US dollars. So you really have to like American cars, in my opinion, if you're going to be biting off on a watch like this. Maybe you just like the style, but it's kind of interesting because as the interest in American cars and, like fuel-driven cars in general seem to be going down for so many reasons, not saying I'm for or against that in any way, it takes a Swiss brand to want to slap the American car company brand on the dial. Another American thing that is actually not produced in the United States. Interesting enough. Let me know what you think. Comments below. Now, in other news, Chrono24 has been releasing more data. If you're not familiar, Chrono24 publishes a ton of data about watches because of the largest online marketplace for watches. Debatable sometimes when you get into things like eBay, where it's like, well, it's maybe not a luxury watch, it's a guest watch or something like that. The area can get kind of gray, but Chrono24 kind of takes that lead, and they always have since really their inception, high capital backed, a lot of funding behind them, pushing it a lot, hundreds of employees if you didn't know. But they publish the data out there, and they announced that in some countries, up to half of all watch collections are Rolex based. So half of the watches in collections are Rolex, and in the United States, it's 33.9% of the watches in collections are Rolex watches. But interestingly enough, this data is coming from the watches that are added to the Chrono24 watch collection service that they offer in their app. If you buy a watch at Chrono24, they send you pop-ups and different notifications almost endlessly to get you to add it to your watch box or your watch collection. Some of the other apps out there from some marketplaces have similar functionality, but they do that. And so it's interesting enough that this may not be the whole story here. I think for me, it's pretty interesting to see what that looks like. But what this probably more means is that up to 50% of watches traded or at least sold on Chrono24 are Rolex. It's probably a little more accurate, but feel free to click the link below and follow over to the data where you can make that decision for yourself should you be interested. Now next, in terms of watch collaborations, we have another watch collaboration from Swizz Beatz. This is a DJ and a popular celebrity, and I'm not familiar with everything he does, but what he has done is seemingly he's done a few collaboration watches, not only with Bethune, which is this new collaboration we're talking about, since after the acquisition of Bethune from Watchbox and the associates over there. They bought Bethune, a high-end independent manufacturer, of course, Swiss manufacturer, and now they also had produced previously a Swizz Beatz collaboration, but not only Bethune, they also did a collaboration with Zenith, which I actually kind of like. It's a little bit of a different kind of watch here, but it's probably more in line with the lifestyle of the DJ and all the music and entertainment business. But it's kind of funny, right? It's I don't know who they are. Are there other people? Really, I mean, I've heard of them, but are there people out there that really, focus on this person? Where's the overlap in watch collecting, high-end independent manufacturer? I'm curious where the overlap is. I mean, it's very clear based on the name Swiss and Beats. It's kind of like a pun in horology, right? Watches beat where they tick. And Swiss obviously produced in Switzerland. So it like begs the question, is this guy, is he getting these collaborations because it's kind of in his name, or is there something about the overlap? I would love to hear your opinions down below. Nonetheless, the watch looks really cool, and there's only going to be 13 of these pieces produced, so it's going to be actually pretty difficult to get your hands on, I do think. Now, next, is Breguet going to be making a comeback? I think so. In a recent statement by some of the Hayek family members, there'll be a link in the description below. You can check that out for the full quote. Essentially, they noted that many brands are pulling out of retail authorized dealers in favor of their own distribution channels, their own efforts to control and maintain the life cycle of the product. You see it with Richemont that now owns Watchfinder, one of the largest pre-owned watch dealers. And you see it across the board, but Swatch has time and time again stated that they're really not looking to get into pre-owned, but they're looking to double down, increase the number of doors that they have for authorized dealers, and they made comments about this as well. And with that comes Breguet, which really doesn't have many authorized dealers, at least in the US, and they've lost a lot of notability. They've kind of slowed down in a bit. It's a shame because it's truly one of my favorite brands. I really think it resembles a lot of classic watchmaking, and as well as being an old world heritage brand that really hasn't deviated too far away from the original roots of that more classic type of watch. And there's even a hand style named after them, the Breguet hands, right? There'll be a picture here. But I'm excited to see where Swatch goes with this. I want to see Breguet have some cool new watches, more so than very subtle changes. I want something interesting new. I'm looking forward to this particularly. Now next, Christopher Ward. People say, why don't you talk about Christopher Ward? Well, the reality is they do so much. They have so many new models. It's a micro brand on a larger scale, right? Christopher Ward maybe was one of the first micro brands. I remember when they came out, and their prices have crept up, but the notability has crept up, and so has the quality and the uniqueness behind some of the models. But now Christopher Ward is coming out with a model that is basically going to be funding 2 different charities. They're going to be selling this watch. This is going to be the Blue Marine Foundation as well as the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation. They're going to be raising funds for these 2 foundations by selling 2 limited C63 Sealander watches. Now, one of these specific initiatives goes to cleaning up the ocean, all of that type of thing, as well as this other foundation is going to try to save the snow leopards in Kyrgyzstan and Mongolia. Now, I think the watch looks pretty cool, and it's probably going to have, it should have the same quality as all the other Christopher Ward watches in the current catalog. Nothing to say about that, but I have to interject here. I think it is very absurd that when London has homelessness up 24%, right? We're talking about London, Christopher Ward London, that's supposed to be, right, their country. I mean, Swiss watches here, many, if not most of them by now, have become Swiss, but nonetheless, a London-based or a British company, homelessness is up 24%, and they want to save the snow leopards in Kyrgyzstan. Noble cause. I think snow leopards look cool, but homelessness in your backyard is up 24% last year, and you want to save a snow leopard. I think that's absurd. And in addition, Vermont, which also has had some issues, and they recently had to raise capital by Ackman, a very notable billionaire investor, they have the same thing. They're supporting a shark laboratory in Bimini, but they're also based in London, and nothing about the actual issues that are supporting the very same land that they share with their manufacturing facilities. I think it's absurd, but at least the watches look kind of cool, right? Comments below. Now we have a new release from Doxa. Doxa is a watch company that has produced so many dive watches over the years. They've gone through different hands, though they are currently owned by a watch manufacturer that produces many of the micro brands that are Swiss that you see on the market today that do feature Sellita or ETA or equivalent movements. Now, Doxa does have a new version of the Sub 200 Seagraph 2 coming out, which is a 42 millimeter size, a slimmer size of what was a 45 millimeter version of this watch, which was previously released. But in addition, they have some very cool and interesting new colorways. And personally, I will say that I owned a Doxa Sub 200, not the chronograph version, but the non-chronograph version. And I thought it was a pretty great watch, especially for the money. Now, this watch for the money is about $3,000 US, less if you get it on a rubber strap and not the bracelet. But I think the quality is there, and they have some very interesting colorways. So if you like them, there's really some good things to be said about this brand. So I would consider it and check it out. Now, rolling on, we have Czapek. Czapek is a brand that has been revitalized and essentially named after, one of the original founders of Patek Philippe, though that's not the direction they went in. They do in-house high-end independent manufacturer watches, but particularly there is a watch model called the Antartique. We've had them at Delray Watch. They are phenomenal. We actually have one at such a great price. These typically are hard to get and have waiting lines. And this particular version that comes out now is a sector dial, but a dark sector dial, kind of a more modern variant. And you're going to be seeing this with the SXH5 automatic movement, which is the business end of this watch. And I think it looks absolutely killer. This watch with that little micro rotor movement on the back, but the way that it's finished and the coatings, and just the overall aesthetics of what Czapek does, and particularly this new watch, I think is very cool. But if you don't want to wait, feel free to check out Delray Watch, where we may have 2 different variations of this watch in stock, though both of them are pretty desirable. So, keep in mind that is reflected in the ask price. Now, last, I want to talk about LVMH, and LVMH is going to do something that I'm excited about. This is the revitalization of the brand and really the aesthetic of Daniel Roth. Now, Daniel Roth was a watchmaker, independent watchmaker, until his brand eventually became bought up after he had moved on, and his designs, which is this notable design here, was wrapped into the Bulgari line. Of course, LVMH owns Bulgari, and they have made different crossovers with the Daniel Roth brand over time, but it's kind of been sitting in somewhat of a dormant phase, if you will. Now, LVMH through the Arnault family. Some of the family runs some of the brands, including Tag Heuer and soon to be Daniel Roth. They're going to be releasing a tourbillon variation of this watch. It's going to be a tourbillon subscription, which means you have to put a down payment, a significant payment down at least beforehand so that you can get your name on the list. It's only be made in a very limited supply, and this is going to be about a $140,000 watch. But interestingly enough, because of the limitation, I would even conject that maybe some of these are going to go to auction and sell for over this because it's truly a legendary brand, and the revitalization is going to make many people happy. But in addition, the dials are going to be made by the Carey Voutilainen Workshop, which is another high-end independent manufacturer that produces some of the most sought-after high-end independent manufacturer watches in existence. So I'm very excited to see what they do with this, but what it looks like is they're going to be taking this watch and making it kind of an LVMH-owned ultra high-end independent manufacturer, if you will, right? Like imagine if you had, FP Journe, but then it was owned by LVMH. Kind of a similar type of thing is probably where I see them going. LVMH trying to take a bite out of the high-end independent manufacturer segment, in contrast with the brands like Tag Heuer. So guys, this has been the TLDR watch news for March 22nd. If there's anything else you'd like to see, please leave in the comments below. Also, make sure to check out the links if you want the full details. You can find me on Instagram, The Real John P. Do not forget to check out Delray Watch. We'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P.